Welcome to Curious DK. Today we're going to discuss the question, is Bluesky a scam? Now, for those who are just learning about Bluesky, you should back it up a little bit and understand first what Bluesky is to try to understand if it's a scam. There was an exchange, I guess this was several months ago, I think it was last year, September 30th, 2022. Jack Dorsey texted Elon Musk to say Twitter never should have been a company. And the concept here is that a new platform is needed. It can't be a company. This is why I left. So that's what Dorsey said. Musk asked, what should it look like? And Jack Dorsey said, I believe it must be an open source protocol funded by a foundation of sorts that doesn't own the protocol, only advances it. And I think that's like a good way to think about what's going on here. When we think about decentralizing social media, it's really important that nobody controls it and that it can be experimented in a lot of different directions without a profit motive tied to the network. And so I think the idea of moving the networking layer from a platform or an application down to a protocol is a big deal and a big difference. And I think that's what Bluesky is attempting to achieve. But I think the path is, I'm a little skeptical that the path is a fruitful one. But, I generally like the fact that there's attempts at this. Bluesky, for more on that, it started in 2019 as an internal project at Twitter with the goal of creating an open source decentralized standard. And I think the goal is great. Maybe Twitter could one day be a client of the standard. And Bluesky went independent in 2021 and officially ended its association with Twitter in 2022 after Musk took over the company. And, I think Jack is, excited about this and on the board of Bluesky, so he has some connection to it, but according to this, he doesn't have unilateral power. This is the CEO of Bluesky. I have the most control over this endeavor. Separately, there's a protocol that's been emergent called Noster, which seeks to have many of the same decentralized properties that I think Bluesky aims at. Dorsey had donated $5 million set aside of this recent OpenSats fund to fund the development of Nostr and Nostr-based projects. And I think generally it's pretty good that there's now kind of mounting support for this. Fiat Joff is the creator of this protocol, but the protocol was created many years ago and really as a bit of a solo community type effort. It doesn't have a corporation behind it. The license on this protocol is public domain, and Fiat Joff took a very different approach, a very ground up approach to building this, which I think is actually the way to get the best type of innovation here. So I kind of like the approach that Fiat Joff took. Though the question of is Bluesky a scam came out because Fiat Joff wrote this blog post yesterday called "Bluesky is a Scam," and he's looking. So AT Proto is the name of the protocol that Bluesky is running, and he has three major concerns with how Bluesky and AT Proto are emerging. One is the protocolness of it, and he sort of is pointing out that the Bluesky app and servers are built to serve the app, and it works well as an app and as a platform, but it doesn't really fit a protocol. It's kind of hand wavy about how a protocol works. It's really good at serving the functions of an app, but it doesn't have the protocol nature that he would hope. So basically, they can call whatever they want. Any company can call whatever they're building a protocol. But in order to actually have protocolness, you might say, you'd want it to be neutral enough that lots of people are excited to build on it and that it becomes more of a standard. A protocol is meant to be a standard or a handshake, a style of interaction versus a particular product. So he has concern about the protocolness. He has concern about the identity. So Bluesky's identity system has global IDs, key rotation, human readable names. I think among these, global ID is the easiest one to see. If you have a global ID, you have an issuer, you have somebody who makes a decision that I can be DK and you cannot be DK, or vice versa. Maybe you got there first. But there's somebody who's the issuer who decides that that's the case. And we haven't yet found a way to do decentralized identities with kind of a global namespace. I think there's a lot of projects that are working on this kind of thing, but we haven't seen one that's working at some amount of scale and that's sort of credibly neutral. So I think that can be done at some point, but we don't have it yet. So I think he's right to point out that, the identity is not yet very decentralized. And then the openness, kind of months after launching their product, this is the third concern of Fiat Joff, is the openness. So, they have prominent display of things like follower counts and like counts, and you really can't do those things unless you have a pretty centralized system where you can aggregate all those counts. You can sort of query a database or pull that together. And I think the idea of Bluesky seeks to have these personal data stores, but they run through this Bluesky central server called BGS. And BGS, is a fairly resource-demanding service, and so there may be a few large full network providers. So when you want something decentralized, you'd like to make the cost to run those servers very low so that anybody could run one. Maybe you could run it on a hobbyist computer out of your home, or maybe you could run it on your phone at some point. Very, very low computing requirements would be ideal for more decentralization. And BGS kind of says, well, it's a fairly resource-demanding service, so they're going to run it and look after it. But I think that probably creates the risks that you could get stuck with the choices that they make when running that server. So you'd want to not be dependent on a big resource-intensive server. You'd like things to be more pushed to the edge and be simpler and lighter. This is a quick picture of what Bluesky looks like. So I'm logged into Bluesky here, and you can see it looks, almost pixel for pixel, very similar to Twitter. So it's very easy to kind of onboard and get connected to people, and it feels very familiar. If you're familiar with Twitter, you're going to show up at Bluesky and be very familiar with what's happening here. But there are lots of the features of the service that are obviously pretty centralized. And so things like if we go to search has to have sort of a global picture of all of what's going on, and they very quickly can pull that up because it's just kind of running out of their own kind of app and database. The notifications work just like you would expect in Twitter, so there's nothing really to solve there. And so you can have the followers counts, and it's all just run on one server, so you can quickly sum up and see that I have 30 followers. One of the core things that you're looking to do in decentralizing social media is you'd want to make it so that anybody can follow me from whatever service they're using, and whatever service I'm using doesn't necessarily know about all of that at once. It needs to kind of go out to the protocol network and discover who all is following me. So you'll see in a service like Noster, you have to download the follower count, and it reaches out to a bunch of different servers called relays, and it collects up the follower count dynamically, whereas here, they already know it. So it's very easy to do this if you keep them centralized. It's very tough to do this if you're decentralized. And you can see here, I have an account on this curiousdk.bsky.social, so I'm on their server. So I can do things like moderate content. And so you can look at this and be like, oh, well, that's nice. I'd like to be able to hide, warn, or show, among these categories. But who is deciding what fits into these categories? Those are decisions that people have to make, or people write algorithms to make, but they're not neutral decisions. There's always a taste and preference baked into any decision here. An extreme version of any of these is easy to see, but there's always a gray area or the threshold beyond which something is or isn't included in that. And those are the kinds of things that start to create some of the risks that somebody else is really proxying your ability to investigate what you find to be the truth. If we look at the home again, there's this tab called What's Hot. And so this is obviously, again, very familiar from Twitter, but it's really the system using an algorithm to decide what I get to see, which, is nice for being able to find stuff quickly, but I'm not sure how I can switch out that algorithm or what their approach or plan or strategy is for making that more switchable so that it's not dependent on their app and their algorithmic choices and their servers. I think they have a proposal, and here if we look, this is a blog post that was dropped by Bluesky May 5th, so just a few days ago, by the Bluesky team, and they talk a little bit more about AT protocol. But when I look at this, I've read through the docs. I wouldn't consider myself an expert at AT protocol, which is the protocol that runs Bluesky. But looking through the docs, I find it, I've read it several times through, and I find it hard to represent well what's going on. And maybe that's because I haven't built software that uses it, or maybe that's because it's a bit, they've sort of added a bunch of layers of complexity before they've really figured out a core thing that works. I think they took a bunch of good ideas and goals, but then they wanted to build a complete system. And in building the complete system, they're creating more complexity. There's a famous system design law called Gall's law, and it says a complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that worked. And a complex system designed from scratch never works and cannot be patched up to make it work. You have to start over with a working simple system. I think that's actually a good, generally good principle to follow when thinking about systems, and especially software systems and system design. Really what it says is you need to start very small and very simple and get something working, and then it doesn't mean that nothing should ever be complex, but complexity should be built around a thing that's working so you can solve problems that emerge from the thing that's working. In the case of Bluesky, I think, Fiat Joff's concerns, I would side with that it's not really a simple system, and it's not really working as a simple system. It's more of a complex system. And, even if you've got all the smartest people in the room, thinking through the design trade-offs for a complex system, it's really hard to get it working when it has all these layers of complexity, and we don't yet know, are the personal data stores the right approach, and then how should the feed generation or these app views work, and how do these things all communicate with each other, and what happens when they get overloaded? There's just a lot of trade-offs that are inherent in that thinking, and if you've been working on something and you don't yet have answers to those trade-offs, it's just tough to develop them. You sort of have to start over from scratch. And a lot of people fall into this trap because most people who experience a system experience it after complexity has been layered on. So if you're not part of the very early people working on it, you never see the thing when it's simple. You only see the version that's more complex, that already has the complexity layered in, and you assume that that's maybe how success looks. But the reality, if you look at something early, it's usually very simple and minimal, and it actually underachieves at most of the goals, but it has the structure that can achieve and that you can start to grow around. And you can sort of patch up the problems over time. And so kind of my assessment on this is that Bluesky is easy to use. It feels just like Twitter. So it's very easy to onboard, and everything is very familiar. There's nothing awkward. You don't have to learn much about it. But it's a complex new architecture, and it's centrally planned. So there's a organization, company, foundation, a CEO, a leader, a team that they've assembled. And, I think the centrally planned nature of it makes people, it looks familiar in many ways, and it feels like the kind of work you should be doing, but it also limits the organic kind of groundswell or bottoms up usage, which helps define what the next layers and what the next complexity should be. And they have a plan to decentralize, but they don't really have any evidence of how that would work, and will they be able to galvanize the right energy to get people building according to their plan. Now, Nostr, on the other hand, is a totally different set of trade-offs. I think, Bluesky is basically rebuilds Twitter, but with a plan to decentralize, but not much decentralization actually built in yet. And Nostr, on the other hand, takes the very opposite end of the spectrum, and it has different sets of trade-offs. So it's tougher for new users to get started. People are dealing with public, private keys and key management that they're kind of unfamiliar with for the most part. You can't just use an email and password when you're decentralized like this. And it's worse performance. So if you open up the feed system or the notification system, it doesn't necessarily have all the data right there the way you might hope it would if you're familiar with Twitter, because it has to go out to a bunch of different relays and different systems that are going to provide the data that's going to assemble your feed, or that's going to pull in all the notifications. And so it's tougher for new users to get started, and it's worse performance, but it's very open and decentralized from the start. It's so open that it's just an agreement, like a protocol is just an agreement. It's a style of interaction that Fiat Joff came up with. And then, he did a lot of hard work to try to convince people to build clients. He didn't want to be both the protocol designer as well as the client designer, because then that sort of centralizes too much. So my understanding of the history of this is he actually was out pushing a lot of people to consider building on Noster, but he was not the one building the core clients, and certainly is not the one responsible for the most popular clients today. It's a much more decentralized system of he's come up with the agreement style, but then there's many people who run relays that are much larger than anything that he does, and there's many people who run clients that are much larger than anything he does. And so it's very open and decentralized from the start, but it's a very simple system, and it has lots of problems. So the simplicity that it has allows a lot of people to build on it and a lot of people to get value out of using it and playing with the new stuff. And then an emergent and competitive set of architectures can emerge for improvement. So people are excited about it. Any developer can show up and start building stuff today on Nostr. I think you need to probably, get blessed if it's even possible. But to build on Bluesky is not just show up and start doing stuff. It's like you have to probably talk to people. Even to get an account, you have to talk to people. So it's a very closed down ecosystem compared to Nostr, and comes with the trade-offs as such. And there's a gentleman named Rabble who has done a lot of work on decentralized protocols for a long time. And he wrote this note. This is a note he wrote on Nostr. And he also... I saw it both on Nostr and on Bluesky. He has been dedicated to these kinds of endeavors for a long time, and he's spent time with all the people involved. And I think he sort of he sees a pretty balanced view of this. He thinks the two projects represent different approaches, and one is kind of the Cathedral model of Bluesky and the Bazaar model of Nostr. I think that's a good way to think about it. So I pulled up some pictures here if you haven't heard of those concepts. The Cathedral model is kind of a centrally planned model of design and development. So you could see if you wanted to build a cathedral like this, you'd have to have an architect and maybe a designer and big teams of engineering that are sort of figuring out how all of the buttresses and all of the glass work up here is going to work. And you want to make sure that all these all of these pillars are consistent and they have the nice decorative elements, and all of the lights are consistent, and then all of these chairs and seating are consistent. So it's a very planned thing. And so you want somebody who's going to marshal the resources, do all the planning, get it to work. And those can work and they can be beautiful. That works, if you want to build a cathedral. But the other model of software development that's common is the Bazaar. And in the Bazaar, which is kind of how a lot of open source stuff works, you sort of have a big space and you invite people to come, and people set up, and this person's selling hats and this person's chosen to sell bags, and maybe somebody over here's got a food stand or a stall, and other people are doing little handicrafts and little, trinkets and stuff. So this is a very different model than sort of a centrally planned one, and a lot of open source software follows this model and works. A lot of corporate software follows the Cathedral model, but the open source stuff often follows the Bazaar model. So the goals are, you want to be able to control your identity. So I can log in without anybody controlling my ability to log in. And then you want to control your relationship. So if I follow people or if they follow me, they should be able to interact with me regardless of any third parties. There shouldn't be one central third party who can decide that my relationships can no longer see things that I'm doing, or that I can see things that they're doing, so that you want to decentralize that and push that out to the edges. And then there's nobody who should be able to control your post. So if I post something, if I say something, it should be out there, and then whoever wants to see it should be able to see it. And it should be easy for whoever has opted in because of maybe our relationships. They've opted into seeing my post, but nobody should be forced to see my post, but anybody should be able to see any post I make. And so you want to avoid the suppression of speech. You don't want to allow people to make unilateral decisions that cause people to be muted. And you can solve other things if you want to add extra layers for, safety or a certain perspective in the world. Maybe you want to limit speech in certain categories. You could layer that on top of a foundation of openness. But I think if you start to commingle the kind of safety or the content moderation with the substrate on which the posts happen, then you're really empowering the person who does the content moderation to really censor or present information that's consistent with their views that may not be consistent with the individual's views. And this is all about empowering the individual to be able to say what they want. So kind of to wrap it up, I'm a fan that more approaches are better, assuming they're not outright scams. And I don't think Bluesky is an outright scam. I think it is an attempt at making a better world, but I think it takes more of the cathedral approach, which I don't find as compelling as the Nostr approach, which is more the Bazaar approach and the bottoms up stuff. And I think, ultimately, I don't think we're going to have dozens or even, handfuls of winning social native protocols for the internet. I think there'll probably be one, because we want one that everybody can use and agree to use together, so that we can connect to anybody in the world and not be beholden to platforms. We can connect to anybody in the world via protocols. And so I think the winning formulas will aggregate the non-winning formulas. And so, I hope that Bluesky continues to make headroads in this path. And maybe they end up becoming a client of Nostr at some point, or maybe a lot of the people who are building Nostr clients become a client of the AT protocol that Bluesky is promoting. Ultimately, what I care about is, again, that these goals are met, that you control your identity, you control your relationships, and you control your posts. And it doesn't really matter if Bluesky wins or if Nostr wins. I think you want to avoid outright scams. I don't think Bluesky is an outright scam, but I would share Fiat Joff's concerns that it doesn't yet look like it achieves much in the way of decentralization. And so, seeing if those plans come together and get there is one that I'm going to be watching closely. And I'm going to participate in both ecosystems, but I feel like Nostr is more in line with the worldview that I'd guess is going to get there faster. So if you like what you're learning here, I make a lot of videos about Nostr, some stuff about Bitcoin in general, technology, AI, etc. So if that's stuff you want to learn more about, subscribe to the page, hit the notification bell so you know when new videos are published, and give it a like, so that helps spread the word and helps more people learn about these new technologies. Thanks for watching.